of how I got started into hammocks was just wanting to get a better night's sleep. And kind of a brief history on hammocks and the course that I teach. I do a hammock safety training for our troop, and we try and keep that limited to after our scouts have been in the troop for a year, because we want them to have all of those first camping experiences, in the tent and those kind of things. And then after their first year, we allow them to take the hammock class. And the hammock class basically is 2 troop meetings and then an outdoor experience on their camping trip. And at the end of that training and the safety training and learning how to conscientiously and safely hang a hammock, we issue them an orange carabiner, which is kind of their kind of like the equivalent to a totem chip or a fireman chip. And they have to hang that orange carabiner from their suspension. And they have to have that anytime and all the time they have their hammocks actually strung. So I can see that. And if at any time they are using the hammocks incorrectly, if they're using them as a swing or got multiple people in them and just not being conscientious or safe, we take that from them and they have to take the course again. So we have had pretty good luck with that over the last couple of years. We've gone through a couple of different years and eras of scouts. And I've actually kind of opened it up, and I've done probably maybe a half dozen to 10 additional troops throughout the district and doing training for them as well. So it's kind of been a love of mine. My son comes and helps me. He was going to come in on this tonight, but I think he's in with Duger on the chapter meeting. So, but how hammocks actually kind of got started, they were started in South America. And it was basically to get the folks that live there up off of the ground. Christopher Columbus is widely accredited, I don't know how accurate that is, to bringing hammocks to the European world during the Age of Exploration. And one of the things that they noticed is that they could get, 2 to 3 times more people stowed in the same area of a ship when they used hammocks, as opposed to scatter them all over the decks and below decks. Because you can hang a hammock 2 or 3 high and get 3 times as many people. And if any of y'all have ever been to the USS Yorktown down in Charleston, if you know how you sleep in those bunks that they've got down in the berth, then that's basically, they're just hammocks. That's all they are. They're just a rigid hammock that you're sleeping in, and they're 5 or 6 high in there, some of those berthings. So kind of what we're talking about, though, is a gathered in camping hammock. And a gathered in camping hammock is basically just a piece of fabric that's gathered on the ends, and you have a suspension where you're suspending yourself from trees or some type of fixed anchor point, and you sleep. There are tons and tons of different varieties and styles and brands of suspension and hammocks and all these different things. And when we do the class or do the course, that it's actually, we kind of go into depth on those. And since we're kind of doing the abbreviated version tonight, we will basically talk about probably the most popular style, and that's the parachute material hammock, kind of like the Enos that you see out there. That's probably the biggest name out there. The one that I've got, or one of the ones that I have, is put out by a company called Bear Butt that was owned by a couple of Eagle Scouts based out of Utah, and that's why I bought that one. But it's basically the exact same design, the same material, and all those kinds of things. The suspension is the same. And this is probably, like I said, the most popular that our scouts are using right now, because you can get them all at, I think they sell them at the Scout Shop. They sell them in REI, and they're pretty common, and they're very simple to set up, and they're very simple to get into, and it's relatively inexpensive to get into. So with that, I want to go ahead and kind of start. And what we would do is I start from the trees and work my way in, and I start at the top and work my way down to the ground. And that's how I do my training, because everything starts with the trees. Everything starts from those anchor points and works its way into the hammock itself, and then from the tarp down. This is basically just going to cover a real simple introduction to suspension. It'll have, we didn't get too much into tarps, because I'm sure that all of us have some extensive tarp knowledge, and we could do an entire hour just on tarps. So I've got some video clips here. We're going to start out with talking about our suspension system or straps. This is the most common kind, and it's the Atlas strap, or Kodiak strap is the brand that I have. But if you see the Eno, this is what their style strap is.
We hung this strap around our tree. Why do we not want to use rope? Rope can cut into this bark, and there's the live cellular layer that's in between the bark and the woody part of this tree, and we don't want to damage that because that could actually kill the tree, and that actually goes against what the BSA is standing for in conservation and those types of things. So we want to make sure that we're conscientious when we go and hang a hammock. So here we go. This is, again, a 1-inch. Now, one thing that if you'll look at is when I came around, the strap is coming through the loop here on the end, but I pulled that strap over on the end. And the reason being is because that keeps the force pulling on this loop down. If I were to pull this all the way over here, it'd be pulling against that, and you've got a lot more force pulling on this stitching that's back here. So if you're using this kind of strap, kind of slide that over to the side, and it really reduces the amount of stress that's going on this bar tack over here. All right, so we've done that on this side. And we've done the exact same thing over on this side. Again, we've got our 1-inch strap that has gone around a tree, and it's not going against, we're kind of pulling it out towards from the tree, so it's not putting any pressure on this, or less pressure on this bar tack here. So our straps are good to go. Okay, so let's hang a hammock.
Okay, so that's the first part, hammocks. On your straps, you want to make sure that you've got a minimum of a 1-inch strap that goes around that tree. A lot of state parks, I've heard here within the last couple of years, have gone to a minimum of 1.5 inch or 2-inch strap. I know Arizona, as a matter of fact, went to 2 inches, I think, last year. So that's something you just kind of need to do some research on before you go. And first of all, make sure that they allow hammocks. And the second thing is what do they require as far as a width on your straps. Another option that you can do is actually when you're hanging those straps around a tree, you can actually take sticks and put them in between the straps and the bark itself, and that actually helps spread out the pressure as well. So that's our big thing. You want to make sure that you're taking care of your trees to make sure that when somebody goes back to hang a hammock in the future, that the trees are still there, they're still healthy. And also to kind of talk about what do we do when we're looking for trees. We're looking for a minimum of probably 6 inches in diameter. That's what I look for. I've told the rule of thumb is typically the width of your hand. If you can get, from the palm, from the tip of your thumb to your finger, that's going to be a good kind of rule of thumb to give you a good measurement on a tree that's going to be okay to hang from. Second thing you want to look for is you want to look for the health of the tree. Make sure that it's not dead or dying. Some trees, I know, like I think it's a beech tree, looks healthy on the outside, but it's hollow as a pipe on the inside. So you want to make sure that it's a good, healthy tree. Make sure that it doesn't look like it's having any issues. Look above. Make sure there aren't any widowmakers, dead limbs, those kind of things that may come down on top of you. Basically, just you want to make sure that what you're hanging from as far as an anchor point is safe, secure, to make sure that you're not going to have any damage to yourself or any damage to anybody else. Before I was an ASM with 365, I heard one of their scouts, it was kind of a horror story, that hung his on a dead tree and it fell over. So that is, certainly not a good thing. Luckily, nobody got hurt, but it's a lesson. And I've also seen stories. Anytime I see stories online with hammocks, and folks, they were hanging off the wrong thing. They didn't pay attention to what they were doing. They didn't take into account some of the things that you need to think about when you're hanging on an anchor point. It's just that it's an anchor point. It's not something that you can just throw a rope around and all of a sudden you can hang a hammock. It doesn't exactly work like that. The next thing you want to think about is the suspension that connects to the hammock itself. A lot of folks use carabiners. The best thing with carabiners is you want to make sure that you're using those that are rated for climbing. We've all seen the keychain and the novelty style. Night Eyes is absolutely one of my favorite companies, and they're great for the little accessory hooks and those kinds of things, but they are not designed for climbing. You want to look for a good quality carabiner, and for $5 or $6 you can get one that's rated for actual climbing and as load bearing. And I've got a little bit of video on that as well.
Reason being, with those heavy metal parts right there, it could rub on your fabric, and you don't want to get any kind of holes inside the fabric that'll mess with the integrity. So I always, whenever I wrap my hammock up, I always kind of stick them on the outside like that. That also gives you something to hold it by. So we'll start out by taking one of our carabiners. One important word about carabiners: the kind of carabiner that you want to get are the actual climbing style carabiners. There are lots of manufacturers out there that make sure that they are designed for climbing. Do not use the novelty put out by lots of different companies. You see a lot of people with their keychains and those kinds of stuff, or accessory hooks for their backpacks and those types of things. You always want to use one that is actually designed specifically for camp or for climbing, because if you're using anything else, it does not have the rated capacity to hold body weight. And these are designed specifically to be able to hold a body while it's climbing. So it'll obviously hold a hammock and a hammocker. So how I always start is I always kind of find a good adjustment point in the middle, because we'll have to do some further adjustment on this. And I'll clip my hammock into that. So I've got hammock here on one side hooked into the carabiner, and then the carabiner hooked into here. And then we do the same thing over here. So we've got our hammock hung, but what we need to do now is adjust where we're going to hang this hammock. The rule of thumb, when you have got a hammock in between two trees, and your distance between your two trees, you want to keep around 12 to 15 feet. That's a good distance for the length of a traditional 10 to 11 foot hammock, but also that you have enough room for your tree straps.
So if you'll notice, I had hooked the carabiners up to your daisy chain. And what you'll use is, what you can do is you can actually adjust where you have hooked onto those daisy chains, and that'll give you your height. And I won't play it till the end, because I kind of cover something at the end, but I want to make sure that this is kind of important, is that the degree of hang that comes off of those trees, I'm sure that if we've watched a scout do it, we've seen them do it a million times, and they string a hammock and it's straight across. Here, use this right here. They've got it strung. It looks like a clothesline. That is actually way too much pressure on the trees, on your suspension, on the hammock itself. That particular type of hammock is a sewn-in channel, so it's actually got a piece of nylon that goes through the end. And so instead of being whipped, it's fed through, and so it's got a channel there, and it's reinforced with 3 stitches across the end. And what that does is it increases the pressure that's on the fabric, on that channel, and on your suspension and on the tree. What you want is about a 30-degree angle coming off of that tree. 30 degrees in probably within a degree or two. I don't know, you're probably all saying, because I tell all the scouts this, is, we're not doing geometry out there. I don't take a protractor with me when I go camping. But I will tell you the easiest way to find out. That right there. From the tip of your finger to the tip of your thumb is 30 degrees. So you stand back and you hold your thumb where your suspension is coming off the tree, and your strap should come down and meet the end or within that first knuckle of your finger, and that'll give you 30 degrees. That's opportune, or not opportune, but that's the ideal distance or degree of hang that you want coming off of that tree, because it keeps the pressure off the tree, it keeps the pressure off your straps, and it keeps additional pressure off of your hammock as well. Another thing is, and we'll see in another video here coming up, is that you're not laying in a hammock from end to end, not like a banana. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to sleep diagonally on this piece of fabric. And when you have that 30-degree angle off the edge of trees, it allows that fabric to spread out. And actually, you can get a pretty good flat lay, and it's real ergonomic to your back. I know that was one of the things that I loved, is that I could get up in the morning and I didn't feel like I was going to die. To Dan, yes, most hammocks do come with carabiners. The kind that we typically use, like the Neuse, they come with them. Well, actually, I think the suspension comes with them. The Atlas straps come with them. I bought mine separately, and I got them, I think, for like $5 or $6 off of Amazon. Black Diamond makes them. They were a popular one. I'm trying to think of some of the other companies, but you can get them. I know Chenard, back when I was in college, is the ones that we used a lot. So yes. Yes, and on those, they say not for climbing. They'll actually have a rating on them that says, can take this amount of pressure and that kind of thing. Yes, the double hammocks, Jenny, are easier to pull off the diagonal lay because they typically are around 6 to 10 inches wider than a traditional hammock. But I will say one thing, that you get a much flatter lay if you get a longer hammock. Because if you go longer, you've got more fabric from end to end, and then they'll have that additional fat. And I'll tell you, because I thought, excuse me, the same thing, is the very first hammock I made, and I've actually got some video of it at the end, and it was out of a $15 tablecloth. It was a nylon taffeta tablecloth that I bought from a place called the Tablecloth Warehouse. And what you do, and it has a rated, they kind of have some funky colors because they're not made to hammock in. They're made to put on for wedding receptions and all that kind of stuff. But I got the widest one they had, and I was just psyched. I was like, man, this thing's going to be awesome. It's going to be like the Venezuelan or the Brazilian hammock. Well, the thing is, I got in it, and I call it the bathtub syndrome. I laid down, and the whole thing just wrapped around like a cocoon, so I couldn't even see the sky. And that was when I was hanging just about perpendicular to the hammock. So yes, if you get a longer hammock, you can get the double nest. Essentially, it's wider, and that's a lot of people think that's the double nest for the that you can get 2 people in it. I wouldn't put 2 people at maybe 2 little Cub Scouts, but certainly not 2 people like my size. But no, and actually the primary hammocks that I actually use, I made myself because I can kind of custom. I sewed one. I've got one that's like 11 by, I think, 5.5 feet, 66 inches or so. And the reason is because I wanted a little bit longer and a little bit wider so I could get that good flat lay. So what I do is I try and get my butt around 18 to 24 inches off the ground. The rule of thumb that I always heard when I first got into hammocking is don't ever hang higher than you're willing to fall. So for me, I don't want to fall more than about 1.5 feet. So what you'll do is you can move your straps up and down the tree themselves. And again, a lot of this is just kind of getting out there and experiencing and figuring it out. That's essentially how I did. If my trees are further apart, obviously you got to go a little bit higher with your straps. If your trees are closer together, you can come down a little bit and then choke up on your anchor points and kind of shorten your suspension in between the hammock and the tree itself. And there's just a lot of, kind of give and take here and there. One thing that I have on my regular hammocks is I've got what's called a ridgeline. and it goes from one end to the other where the suspension connects to the hammock itself. And what that does is it sets what we call sag. And basically, it looks like a smile. You've got your hammock that is in a smile shape. But I know that that position of sag is exactly comfortable for that's my sweet spot. That's exactly where I want to hang. So what I did is I went outside of my backyard, set my hammock up, put my ridge line in between those two anchor points, and then I laid in my hammock and got in. No, that's not comfortable. I'd choke it up a little bit, put it down. No, that's not quite right. Good starting points around 83%. Where 83% came from, I have no idea. I just did it and it worked. I'm actually closer to about 80 when you really run the numbers. But it does not matter how far apart my trees are, how close they are, how far up on the tree I have to go, or how much I have to tighten that suspension up. As long as I pull to where that ridge line is taut, I'm going to have that same sag in the middle the entire time. So I know that it's going to lay for me exactly the way it did the last time I did. So that's kind of a big thing. The next biggest part is, I think, where a lot of people have some concerns is staying warm. Staying warm during the wintertime in a hammock. There's a couple of different ways that you can achieve staying warm, because obviously if you look at a hammock, when you watch the news, when we have winter weather, they always talk about the bridges and the overpasses, and how you've got the air circulating around it, so it actually freezes the water that is actually on that bridge or overpass. Well, what's a hammock? It's a fabric overpass is what it is. And so what you've got constantly have that air circulating around you. There are two ways to lose heat when you're camping. One is convection and one is conduction. You lose heat through conduction when you're in a tent. You're laying on the ground. That's why you've got that pad underneath you to insulate you from that ground. But in a hammock, you've got convection. You've got the air that's circulating around you that's sucking the body heat out. So you can do one of two things. You can either do exactly what you did in the tent, is use a backpacker mattress. That's how I started out. I used a Walmart closed cell. I think it was like $12 or something like that. Laid it down in my hammock and slept on top of it, and it got me down into the 20s. So I didn't really have any issue there. The only problem with that, though, is they can act as a moisture barrier or a moisture and vapor barrier. And what that does, as you perspire and respire, you're losing moisture out of your body, and your back and the backs of your hips and your butt and the backs of your legs, you can get moisture built up in your clothing. And so when you get up the next morning and it's 19 degrees, it's a little airish. But that's the unfortunate thing about using a pad, is it just doesn't allow that airflow. It actually blocks that heat out, or blocks the air and the perspiration from getting out and evaporating off. So, but those work fine. Like I said, I know a lot of guys that do that, and that way you can get into hammock a little bit less expensive. You don't have to worry about buying any extra gear, and having to worry about underquilts and top quilts and all that kind of stuff. At that point, find out if you like it first. What I use as far as a top quilt, I use a sleeping bag. I zip it up about 18 to 24 inches up that, and I slide my feet in the bottom, and I turn it upside down, and I use it like a quilt, and I just pull it up around my shoulders. So I've got the pad beneath me. I've got the sleeping bag on top of me. Sometimes if it gets real cold, I'll use two sleeping bags. I also have got the Whoopee, the military style poncho liner. Actually, I found one on Amazon. It's, I think, done by the British Army. It's called Snug Pack. And I use that as well. Even into the fall, you don't have to worry about a sleeping bag, and that's like a 20-degree bag or something like that. The other thing you can do, and I've actually got some video footage that I'll show you, is an underquilt. And you'll see they kind of look like a sleeping bag that's suspended beneath a hammock. And when you look at those, they have baffles in them, and they either have some type of man-made material or down that's in those. Actually got a man-made one because it doesn't pack down quite as much, but it'll continue to have the insulation properties when it gets wet. And we're in Scouts. We get wet. I mean, I don't think I've been on a camping trip where I didn't have some kind of wet coming down from the sky at one point or another. But I'll use it's a 3/4 inch long underquilt. I have it goes from about the top of my shoulders down to about my calves, and I'm right at 6 feet tall because I've got so much stuff wrapped around my feet with the sleeping bag. I don't have to worry about getting cold feet, and I usually have got that military style blanket wrapped around my shoulders and my head. So really, it's my core temperature that I'm really trying to keep warm and during those times. So the underquilt is suspended underneath you, and it gathers the air just like a sleeping bag. What keeps us warm when we're in a sleeping bag is loft. Loft is all the air that gets trapped by the material in the sleeping bag. The problem is when you're laying on top of that one side of the sleeping bag, you're compressing that insulation. And when you're compressing the insulation, it's warming or insulation properties drop dramatically because it can't hold the amount of air, and your body can't heat that air up because there's so little of it. That's why you use the pad. It acts as an insulator. What you can do is an underquilt hangs underneath you, and since it's below the hammock, your body is not pressing on it. It allows that loft to continue to stay up, and it traps your body heat in the air that's actually in that insulation. I've seen folks that have used old sleeping bags. They'll cut them up and make underquilts out of those. You can get 2 good underquilts under one of those. I made my very first one out of a military poncho liner. I bought one, I think, for like $20 or $25 from an Army surplus store, folded it in half, ran some shock cord through it, and hung it underneath, and it got me down into like the 50s and the 40s. I mean, it was, it did what it was supposed to do. And then I saved up and bought myself a cottage vendor, Arrowhead equipment out of, I think he's out of Idaho, for $100. I bought myself a regular underquilt with Climate Shield that's underneath me. And it's a great piece, but if it gets real cold, I'll use them both. So those are the ways to kind of keep yourself warm. On top, again, sleeping bag. There's absolutely nothing wrong with using a sleeping bag on top of you. You just roll your feet up in the bottom, pull it up around your shoulders, and you're good to go. Keep your head warm. You're good to go. So,
method of keeping you warm in the wintertime is what we call an underquilt. Now, an underquilt is basically the same idea as a sleeping bag. You've got that loft on top of you, and that loft traps air, which keeps your body heat in. But what an underquilt does is, rather than laying on top of it like we do the bottom of a sleeping bag, is it actually hangs beneath the hammock. So what happens is this is a layer of insulation. This is actually an artificial insulation right here. And the reason why I've got that instead of down is because this will still keep you warm. It doesn't pack down quite as tight, but it will keep you warm throughout, even if it gets wet, as opposed to down where if it gets wet, it loses its warming ability. So I went ahead and opted for the imitation or the man-made fiber. But this will hang underneath you. Your body actually fits down in this. And the only issue with this is that you have to get some adjustments in. So my recommendation is, if you decide to go with an underquilt, the first thing you want to look for is measurements, because they come in half size, they come in 3/4 length, and then they come in full length. This is a 3/4 length from a company called Arrowhead Equipment. And I went with the 3/4 because typically I only get cold from the middle of my back down to around my knees, and sometimes up to my shoulders. And that tends to be enough that covers that area, and I always have enough socks, and the end of my sleeping bag doesn't get compressed, so I don't have to worry too much about cold feet, but just that core body area to keep it warm. So this right here, you lay in it, and you want to make sure that it's not too tight. If it gets too tight, you're not really doing yourself any good. It's going to compress that material on the inside, so it's going to hang below you, and that stops that convective heat loss with the air circulating around you. It holds that heat from below you, and then you've got a top quilt or a sleeping bag on top of you, and it makes it a nice cocoon, a nice warm area. This particular one, I've used it into the teens, and I've stayed warm, and I've used it in conjunction with a sleeping bag or maybe 2 sleeping bags if it gets really cold. Because at that point, I'm not really going for weight conservation. I'm going more for comfort. So that is basically how you stay warm in wintertime. In summertime, basically what I try and do is I don't put any of this stuff on. I'll use like just maybe my jungle blanket, the snug pack blanket that we just talked about, or I will use a sleeping bag liner. When we've done summer camp in the past, I'll just take like the cotton or the microfiber sleeping bag liner, and I'll use that. Or sometimes I don't use anything at all. I'm in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, and I sleep right in there just good, and that is enough air circulation to keep you cool. I've done entire weeks at summer camp in a hammock.
Staying cool. Obviously, you kind of do the opposite. Last year at Durant, all I had on top of me is I had one of those sleeping bag liners. Instead of having a sleeping bag or a sheet or something like that, I actually had like a sleeping bag liner, and I did the exact same thing. I just put my feet in the end, and that air circulating around you pulled the heat off, and it sometimes at night it was awesome. We went to Daniel Boone 2 years ago, and it was some of the best sleep I've ever had. So there are ways to stay cool, and there are ways to stay warm in these things. What I'll do is after this is over, I'll put together a list of resources. There's a guy on YouTube that was kind of my guru on this stuff. His name is Sean Emery. His nickname is Shug. And I could put that together and send it to Steve, and he can send it out through everybody who is here. But he is a hammock camper up in Minnesota. He's actually originally from down close to Charlotte, and he worked for Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus for several years as a clown. So his videos are extremely helpful and beneficial when you're learning how to hammock, but he's also extremely entertaining. You may be learning about a diagonal lay while he's sitting on top of a unicycle juggling clubs. I mean, he's kind of like watching a clown teach you about hammock stuff. David and I would get up on Saturday morning and watch Shug videos just because he was hilarious. But he's very, very informative.
And you have another question from Jenny on, do you have any tips for gear storage, trying to avoid the scout technique of just dumping everything under the hammock?
Yeah, I will say as far as gear storage, what is awesome about that is, especially if you're using a big tarp like I do, is there's no place for stuff to get crammed into corners in a tent. And when the tent comes home and you find a sock that's been in there for 6 months, you don't have that. At summer camp, I take a foot locker and I put all my stuff in a foot locker, and I've got it up underneath one end. But say we're on a weekend camping trip, I actually have got an additional strap that I wrap around a tree that goes below my hammock suspension, and I hang my backpack from that. So basically everything stays off the ground. It stays out from underneath me, because there's nothing worse than having to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and I'm bailing out the side of a hammock to hit my backpack, and I get a leg caught in a strap and I'm dragging it halfway across the camp and I'm about to soil myself. But no, I keep it on the tree on the outside. Another thing that you can do as well is hang it from the suspension of your hammock. So one of the things you might have to worry about is, weather, obviously. When you have a tarp up and it's raining, instead of hanging on the tree outside, you can hang it from the inside and hang it around next to your suspension. And actually, a lot of times, if you hang it up at the head side, you can kind of drag your pack around and actually pull stuff out of your pack while you're still in bed. The guy that I was telling you about earlier, Shug, he actually he has a couple of videos where he makes breakfast laying in his hammock. And all he does is kind of lean over the side. So it's pretty impressive, some of the stuff he can do. But yeah, that's what I ended up doing, is I kind of keep everything either in the foot locker on one end for long-term camp, or in a backpack hanging from my suspension. I know one other concern with some folks is cost. Depending on how you start, you can really, if you start looking at some of these cottage vendors, you can really get into some high dollar hammocks. That was something that I was not ready to commit to at that point. I wanted to see, first of all, if I liked it, if I could stay comfortable, if I could stay warm, if I could stay cool, if different types of weather. There are hammocks out there you can put $400 or $500 into, and I just don't have that kind of disposable income. So I started doing some research on a couple of different forums, and that was where we got the idea of the tablecloth hammock. Like I said, we got the tablecloths for like $15, and some straps from Harbor Freight or Tractor Supply, someplace like that. And you can get out and you can have a hammock for $20 to $25. I know that with the popularity of it going up now, you can get a lot of hammocks from Amazon. You can see, and they'll last for a bit, and it's enough to probably get your toes wet, whether or not you actually feel like this is something that you want to kind of pursue. And in fact, I'll be honest with you, I still use my tablecloth hammock now. I don't use it all the time, but I still use it. One codicil is when you get into a hammock, and this is something I cover in the full class, is before you get anything or before you lay down in that, take everything out of your pockets. I learned on my second camping trip as a bear leader that things in your pocket can pierce that fabric, and there is nothing to stop it. Ripstop is kind of a suggestion. And I actually ended up on my butt on the ground. Thank God I wasn't any higher than 18 inches. But that will tear the fabric. So rule number one of getting in a hammock is take your pocket knives out, your ballpoint pens, your car keys, your cell phone. Everything comes out of the pockets before you even lay in that hammock. The thing that I have discovered since getting into this is my love of sewing. I actually sewed my own bug net last year. I made it out of sheer curtain that I got at Walmart for like $7. And I have some shot cord around the bottom, and it actually is an open bottom. So when I roll out of the side, I dive right out. I've sewn a hammock. I've repaired hammocks. And really, I started taking sewing lessons last year and have really gotten to the point that I really enjoy looking at and designing and trying to find different ways of making gear so I can get out of the expense. I'm going to show one more quick video clip, and this is the Whoopee underquilt that I made. You can kind of see there, it's got the shot cord that goes under here and shot cord that comes down here. And like I said, I've got maybe $30 in that, $35. And they got me down into the 50s.
I wanted to show you one last thing. We saw the parachute fabric style of hammock before, and I wanted to show you one. This is how David and I actually started. This is a polyester
I was wrong.
tablecloth that we were able to find at an online source. I think we got them for about $15 to $18 a piece. And what we ended up doing is we took paracord and we whipped the ends. And then I've got a different type of suspension here. These are what you call whoopee slings. And these are made out of Amsteel, which are a marine line. A lot of sailors use it because it's not natural fibers and it doesn't degrade in UV light or in harsh conditions like the sea, like salt water and those types of things. And it's got it's got an adjustable end and then a fixed end that I wrapped around the end of this hammock. And then you'll look here, these are straps again. They're 1-inch straps, but we've got what's called a marlin spike hitch here, and then that adjustable loop just goes right over the end. And I'm going to show you how to do this marlin spike hitch right fast. And what this is just a small piece of aluminum. You can kind of see there, it's just a small little piece. It's almost, I think it's aluminum hunting arrow shafts is what it is, just cut into, I guess that's about a 3-inch piece, 2.5, 3-inch piece. So marlin spike hitch, strap comes down from the tree. You're going to put 2 fingers here and fold yourself a loop. You're going to take that loop and fold it up on itself, and then pull the middle part and then put that toggle in between. So there's the marlin spike hitch. And then we take this piece of AM steel, we hook it over the end. Now the big thing to remember is it goes over the knot. See how it's going over the knot here? It's not going on this piece of aluminum. If it goes on that aluminum, it'll bend and you'll hit the ground. What's holding you up is the pressure on this knot, and that's not going to go anywhere. And so this is basically the same kind of idea as the other one. There's a couple of bells and whistles that I like about this one that the other one doesn't have. It's a little bit wider, so you can actually get a whole lot more horizontal, or not horizontal, but flat on this one compared to the Eno style or the parachute style fabric. One of the things that I noticed kind of early on is that I had a certain distance or a certain degree, or what we call in hammocking a certain amount of sag that was the most comfortable for me. And that's something that you kind of find out by just setting up a hammock and figuring out where it's the most comfortable for you. And so what I have here is I figured out what it was, and I got a piece of, again, a smaller line. It's very much like the AM steel, and this is a fixed ridge line. And what this does is I hook it to either end of the hammock, so no matter how tight or how far apart my trees are or how much I have to do the adjustments on the ends on the suspension system, it's going to keep this amount of sag no matter what. And so that means that no matter how far apart my trees are, how high I have to go, how low I have to go, that I'm going to have the exact same amount of sag in this hammock no matter what. And that keeps it comfortable for me. Basically, the rule of thumb on this is it's 83% of the length of your hammock. So you just take your length of hammock times 0.83, and that'll kind of give you, and that gives you a starting point. I think I'm a little bit closer to 80%, but it's very simple to do. I laid in it, and it took me about an hour to kind of figure out, and just readjusting. This is an adjustable line. You just kind of figure out what's the most comfortable portion. One other thing I wanted to show you is we showed you on the other style of hammock had that pouch on the side, and we put my pocket knife and my pen and all those kinds of stuff that's in that, so you don't pierce the fabric and get it to tear. Well, this is what's called a ridgeline organizer, and all this is a pencil case like you can find at any office supply store or the going back to school sales. And basically it's what hooks into a 3-ring binder, and it's got several different pockets in here. I can put my phone, I can put, I've got charging cord in there right now, keys, pocket knives, pretty much anything can go in here. And what that does, that just keeps it right above your head. The other, I've stuck flashlights in here. Other thing is if you've got a headlamp, I've taken my headlamp and wrapped it around here, so if I have to get up in the middle of the night, I can grab it and go. And again, I've got a few extra bells and whistles, but if you were to use like some cargo straps from Harbor Freight or Tractor Supply, and then a tablecloth like this, you could get out for less than $40. And basically just try and see if you like hammock camping before you go and put the investment into some really good gear, because that way if you don't like it, then you don't have to put it out, and you're not invested in a whole lot of expensive equipment.
The two things that I started when we get new scouts is the best way to get rid of a scout is to have them either get cold or not sleep real well on their first camping trip. And that is a surefire way to get them to never be involved in scouting ever again, because that's going to be a horrible experience. Well, and so what we're trying to do, or what I'm trying to do, is to get my scouts as comfortable in the outdoors so they can't wait to go back. They can't wait to get their next outdoor experience. And obviously it's been kind of somewhat limited over the last couple of weeks, but this is something that I'm extremely passionate about. I want to make sure that they're doing it safely, they're doing it conscientiously, and that they're taking care of the outdoors and the environment in which we hang in, because if we don't treat that well, it's kind of a double thing. We're harm in nature that we're in, but it also gives a real bad taste in the mouth for folks that come afterwards and say, "Oh, those hammock campers, they killed all the trees." And we don't want that. It's a very low impact on the environment. The other thing I like about hammocking is you don't have to worry about, well, where's a flat level piece of ground that I have to set my tent that doesn't have roots or rocks or anything like that. All you need is 2 good anchor points. I've actually hung over rock and roots and the whole 9 yards, and it never affected my sleep. All it was is I just needed 2 good trees.
Hey, Frank, what's the trick of staying, I guess, diagonally, right? I know many
Practice.
of us.
Practice. I'll tell you how I've done it is when you first get in, there's kind of a trick to getting into a hammock to be able to stay that way is you kind of, and this is something that I go over in the class, is I kind of sit and I put my butt in the middle and then I automatically swing my legs because when the side that I'm facing is where my legs go. I always lay with my shoulder to the right and my feet to the left because I'm left-handed. So I like to be able to use my hand and get up in the middle of the night and grab a flashlight and all that kind of stuff. So the big thing for me is, first of all, when it's cold, it's a whole lot easier to do that because you're not moving around quite as much because you find that, that little warm cocoon area. And sometimes you just have to kind of keep the only thing I can say is just you do it over and over and over and over again. And eventually you get it.